The red moon bled across the sky, its light staining the snow-dusted clearing in shades of rust and ruin. It was a hunter's moon, a killer's moon, and tonight I was the prey. The air, thin and sharp with the promise of a deeper winter, carried the scent of ceremonial smoke, pine boughs and dried wolfsbane burning in brass braziers that marked the circle. Their scent was meant to purify, but it only smelled of endings, my ending. Below me, the granite altar was a slab of ice against my bare knees, leaching the last of my warmth, a final cold insult from the earth I was soon to rejoin. My hands were bound behind me with strips of cured leather, the knots cinched so tight they bit into the bones of my wrists. I was Serenia Vaylor, the wolfless girl. The pack's flaw, its genetic dead end, now elevated to its salvation. They called me the sacrifice, and the word was a stone in my throat. Around the clearing, the figures of my pack stood like specters in the crimson light, their faces a blur of grim piety. They weren't watching me, not really. They were watching the prophecy unfold, praying not for my soul but for the prosperity my death would buy them. The murmur of their chants was a low, hungry drone, a vibration I felt in my teeth. Elder Maeve, her face a roadmap of cruelties endured and inflicted, stood before me. The ritual blade in her hand was a sliver of obsidian, black as a wolf's heart and twice as sharp. It caught the bloody moonlight, glinting with a thirsty edge. I stared at it, my breath a fragile mist in the frigid air. This was the culmination of 20 years of being less, of being other. I could not shift, could not feel the thrum of the pack bond that united them, could not offer the pack strong pups. I was a mouth to feed, a shame to be hidden. Until now. Now I was useful. My blood, the prophecy claimed, would appease the moon goddess for the pack's dwindling power and save them from the encroaching famine. My heart hammered a frantic, useless rhythm against my ribs. It was not fear of dying. I had been dying a little every day since my first failed shift. It was the humiliation. To be knelt here, an offering for the very people who had scorned me, their salvation purchased with the life they deemed worthless. A final, silent scream of rebellion tightened in my chest. Let them fail. Let the prophecy be a lie. Let them starve. Maeve raised the blade. Her eyes, pits of shadow in her wrinkled face, met mine. There was no pity there, only a chilling resolve. For the survival of the Blackwood crest, she intoned, her voice cracking like old parchment. May your blood be the key. The pack's chanting swelled, a wave of sound crashing over me. The knife began its descent. I closed my eyes, a single hot tear escaping to freeze on my cheek. And then everything stopped. The chanting died in a collective gasp. The wind, which had been whipping stray strands of my hair across my face, fell utterly still. The crackle of the braziers seemed to mute, the world holding its breath. An impossible silence descended, heavy and absolute. A new scent cut through the pine and wolfsbane, something ancient and electric, like ozone after a lightning strike, fused with the primal musk of apex power and something darker, like scorched earth and old iron. It was a scent of sovereignty, of endings far more final than the one Maeve offered. My eyes snapped open. A shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness of the surrounding forest. It wasn't a man walking into the firelight. It was the night itself given form. He was immense, a monolith of muscle and fury clad in dark leathers and furs. Scars marred the hard planes of his face, one trailing from his temple, narrowly missing an eye that burned with an internal golden light. It was an impossible color, the color of a wolf's eyes. Yet he stood on 2 feet. He moved with a predator's silent grace, each step a pronouncement of his right to be there, to be anywhere. The very air seemed to bend around him, shimmering with a power that made my bones ache. The pack, a moment ago so resolute, recoiled. Alphas, proud and strong, lowered their heads in instinctive submission. Betas averted their gazes. Even Elder Maeve, who had faced down rogue bears and rival packs, froze, the obsidian knife trembling in her hand. Whispers, thin and terrified, slithered through the crowd. The Alpha King. Darius Calthorn. What is he doing here? King Darius. The name was a legend, a horror story told to frighten pups. The wolf who commanded all packs, whose wrath had shattered the northern clans and salted their lands with the bones of their elders. He was a myth, a force of nature, and he was here. His molten gold eyes swept over the scene, dismissing the cowering pack, the sputtering braziers, the furious elder. Then they landed on me, on the altar, on the knife poised above my heart. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the space between us. I saw no pity in his gaze, no mercy. I saw recognition. A terrible possessive fire that seemed to see past my skin, past my bones, and into the hollow place where my wolf was supposed to be. He didn't speak. He acted. With a speed that was a blur to the human eye, he closed the distance. Maeve let out a strangled cry as he reached her. He didn't touch her. He didn't need to. He simply backhanded the obsidian blade. It flew from her grasp, spinning through the air before embedding itself deep into the trunk of a massive pine tree, quivering like a captured insect. Then he turned his attention to the altar. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound that was not human or animal, but something far older, a tremor that shook the very ground. He raised a hand, his fingers elongating, thickening. Black claws, shining and lethal, tore through his skin. Without a word, he slammed his fist into the ancient stone. The sound was like a thunderclap. The granite, which had held generations of offerings, shattered. It didn't crack. It exploded into 100 pieces, shards of stone flying into the snow. The force of the blow threw me backward, and I would have hit the frozen ground if not for an arm that shot out and wrapped around my waist like a band of steel. He pulled me against him. The shock of it was a jolt of lightning through my system. His body was a furnace, radiating a heat that seared through my thin sacrificial tunic. The scent of him, that intoxicating, terrifying mix of storm, power, and dark earth, overwhelmed me, filling my lungs, my head. I was pressed against the chest of a living cataclysm, my head tucked under his chin, his hand splayed possessively across my lower back. I could feel the hard, steady beat of his heart against my ear, a rhythm of absolute command. He lifted his head, his gaze sweeping over the stunned and terrified assembly. His voice, when it came, was not a shout. It was deeper, more resonant, a growl that promised violence and held the weight of law. "She will not die," King Darius Calthorn thundered, the words rolling across the clearing like an avalanche. "Not while I rule." Elder Maeve, her face pale with fury and disbelief, finally found her voice. "Your Majesty," she spat, her tone dangerously disrespectful. "You do not understand. The prophecy, the red moon, it demands this. Our pack will fall if the debt is not paid." The king's golden eyes narrowed, the light within them flaring. He took a half-step forward, shielding me with his body. "Your prophecies are the whimperings of scared pups playing with forces you cannot comprehend," he snarled. "You would spill the blood of the wolfless to cover your own weakness. There is no honor in that. Only fear." He looked down at me then, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical touch. His callous thumb brushed against the bare skin of my waist, sending a shiver through me that had nothing to do with the cold. His eyes traced the column of my throat, where the obsidian blade was meant to fall. A muscle feathered in his jaw. "The red moon will have its blood," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous murmur that was somehow meant only for me, though the whole pack could hear it. But not hers. He released me just long enough to reach down and rip the leather bindings from my wrists with a single contemptuous tug. My freed hands fell to my sides, tingling with the rush of returning blood. He took one of my hands in his grip firm, possessive. His skin was rough, calloused, yet impossibly warm. He pulled me to his side, tucking me against him as if I were a precious, stolen thing. Facing the pack, he stood as a king before supplicants. "This ritual is over. Your pathetic attempt to bargain with fate ends now. I am your fate." He tugged me a step closer, his message clear. I was with him. I was his. She is an empty vessel, a flaw, Maeve shrieked, her composure finally shattering. She has no wolf. She is nothing. Darius's lips curled back from his teeth in a silent, predatory snarl. He didn't bother to look at the elder. His burning gaze was still locked on the pack, daring any of them to move, to speak, to even breathe defiance. You are blind, he growled, the sound vibrating through my entire body. You see nothing because you are unworthy to look. He finally lowered his gaze back to me, and the raw power there stole the air from my lungs. His voice softened but lost none of its command. They call you sacrifice. He tilted his head, a gesture of profound ancient curiosity. But a sacrifice is an offering, given to a higher power. His grip on my hand tightened, a brand of ownership, a silent vow. I am the highest power in these lands, he declared, his voice dropping to a possessive whisper that scraped along my soul. And I do not offer, I take. His words, I take, hung in the frozen air, a verdict and a vow. The world, which had fractured into chaos, snapped back into a new, terrifying order with him at its center. He did not wait for a reply from my pack, for their permission or their protest. My opinion was not sought either. He simply turned, his grip on my hand unyielding, and began to walk, pulling me with him out of the circle of firelight and into the deep, waiting darkness of the ancient woods. I stumbled after him, my bare feet numb against the frozen earth and sharp stones. Each step was a jarring shock, but the iron grip of his hand was the only solid thing in a universe that had tilted on its axis. We passed the line of my pack members, their faces ghost white in the receding crimson glow of the moon. I saw shock, I saw terror, but worst of all, I saw a flicker of something like relief in some of their eyes. Their problem, the wolfless girl, was gone. Their salvation might be forfeit, but so was their shame. I had been excised from them not by a blade, but by a king. Elder Maeve's face was a mask of pure, vitriolic hatred. Her lips were pulled back in a silent snarl, her eyes promising a reckoning that, against the sheer, monumental presence of the man beside me, seemed pathetic and small. He didn't even grant her a final glance. To him, she, my pack, the shattered altar, they were already part of the past. Dust on his boots. The moment the trees swallowed us, the sounds of the clearing died away, replaced by the profound silence of the winter forest. The only sounds were the crunch of his heavy leather boots on the snow and the whisper-soft, clumsy scrape of my bare feet, trying to keep pace. The cold began to sink its teeth into me in earnest now that the heat of the braziers was gone. A violent shiver racked my body, a tremor that started in my bones and rattled my teeth. Immediately, the king stopped. I bumped into his back, my face colliding with the cold, hard leather of his tunic. The scent of him was overwhelming up close, that potent mix of ozone, pine, and something deeply, primally wolf that vibrated in the air around him. He turned, his great height eclipsing the bloody moon. Those impossible golden eyes scanned me from head to toe, lingering on my thin, torn tunic and my bare, trembling limbs. He made a low sound in his throat, a rumble of what might have been annoyance, or perhaps something else. Without a word, he shrugged out of the heavy fur cloak he wore. It was immense, fashioned from the pelt of some great black beast, thick and lined with what felt like the softest doeskin. He draped it around my shoulders. The weight of it was staggering. It felt like a mountain settling on me, but the warmth was instantaneous. It was his warmth, imbued with his scent, a cocoon of sheer dominant power. It smelled of safety and of the deadliest kind of danger, all at once. He adjusted the cloak, his large, calloused fingers brushing the side of my neck. The touch was brief, almost impersonal, but it sent a bolt of heat straight down my spine. I flinched, not from pain, but from the sheer, unexpected intimacy of the gesture. His eyes narrowed slightly, noting my reaction, but he said nothing. He simply took my hand again, his grip now gentler, but no less firm, and we continued on. We walked for what felt like an eternity. The forest, which I had known my entire life, felt alien and menacing under his shadow. He moved as if he owned it, as if the ancient trees bowed to his will. There was no path, but he never hesitated, striding through the undergrowth as if on a well-trod road. I, wrapped in his suffocating warmth, could only follow, my mind a whirlwind of unanswerable questions. Why? Why me? Was I a prisoner, a prize? A different kind of sacrifice, to be used for some purpose I couldn't yet imagine? Death on the altar was an ending I had understood. This was a terrifying, unknown beginning. Eventually the trees thinned, and a new light broke through the darkness. Not the sickly red of the moon, but the steady golden flicker of torches. Ahead of us, rising from the earth like a jagged black fang, was a fortress. It was not a castle of elegant spires and graceful lines. It was a keep, a brutalist monument of dark, unforgiving stone, built for war and survival. Towers clawed at the spike, and high walls, scarred with the memory of old battles, encircled it like a giant's arms. This was Castle Kyle, the heart of the Alpha King's domain. His throne. Armed guards stood sentinel on the battlements and at the massive iron-banded gate. As we approached, their silhouettes straightened, their postures shifting from vigilance to absolute deference. One of them, a warrior with a face like a granite cliff, stepped forward, his eyes wide with surprise as he took in the sight of the king, holding the hand of a half-frozen, disheveled girl in a sacrificial tunic. "Your Majesty," the guard breathed, his voice rough with shock as he bowed his head low. "We did not expect your return so soon." Darius didn't slow his pace. "The hunt was successful," he said, his voice a low growl that carried an ocean of unspoken meaning. He pulled me through the gate, into a courtyard bustling with the quiet, efficient activity of a royal household at night. And then the whispers started. Heads turned, eyes widened. Servants carrying linens froze mid-step. Blacksmiths stoking the midnight forges paused, their hammers held aloft. They all stared. First at their king, their expressions a mixture of awe and fear. Then their gazes slid to me. I could feel the weight of their scrutiny, 100 silent judgments. They saw the tunic, the bare feet, the wildness in my eyes, and then they must have scented it, or rather the lack of it, the void where the scent of a wolf should be. The whispers were like the rustle of dry leaves. Wolfless. A human? Look at her clothes. From a ritual. What has the king brought back? I shrank into the heavy folds of his cloak, wishing it could swallow me whole. I had traded the focused contempt of my small pack for the vast, curious scorn of a kingdom. My shame, once a private burden, was now on display in the court of the most powerful wolf alive. Darius seemed oblivious to the stairs, or perhaps he simply didn't care. He strode through the courtyard and into the main keep, his boots echoing on the stone floors. He led me through vast, torch-lit halls, hung with ancient tapestries, depicting legendary hunts and brutal wars. The air inside was thick with the scent of burning wood, roasted meat, and the combined powerful musk of hundreds of shifters. It was overwhelming, a sensory assault that made my head spin. For a wolfless girl whose sense of smell was pathetically dull compared to theirs, it was like being drowned in a sea of unspoken conversations and raw emotions. Finally, he led me up a winding stone staircase, away from the main halls and into a quieter, more isolated wing of the keep. He stopped before a heavy oak door, banded with black iron, and pushed it open. He guided me inside and then shut the door behind us, plunging the world into a sudden, profound silence. The room was vast and starkly masculine. It was clearly his personal chambers. A massive bed, piled high with black and gray furs, dominated one wall. A fire roared in a stone hearth large enough to stand in, casting flickering shadows across the room. Shelves carved into the stone walls were laden with books, scrolls, and strange artifacts. The skull of some great horned beast, a wicked-looking dagger with a hilt of carved bone, a crystal that seemed to drink the firelight. The air smelled of him, of leather, and of the clean, sharp scent of cold stone. He finally released my hand. The absence of his touch was as shocking as its presence had been. I stood, lost in the center of the room, clutching his cloak around me like a shield. He walked over to the hearth, stoking the flames with a heavy iron poker. The firelight played over the scars on his face, making them seem to writhe like living things. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions. I watched him, my heart a frantic bird trapped in my ribs. He was a creature of myth and nightmare, and I was alone with him in the heart of his power. My tongue felt thick, my throat tight with a fear so primal it stole my voice. After a long moment, he turned from the fire and faced me. Those golden eyes pinned me in place. "The marks on your wrists," he stated, his voice a low, flat command. "Let me see them." Hesitantly, I let the cloak fall open slightly and held out my hands. The leather thongs had chafed my skin raw, leaving angry red welts around my wrists. He crossed the room in 2 silent strides and took my hands in his. His touch was surprisingly gentle as he turned my hands over, his thumb tracing the raw skin. A strange energy, like a faint electrical current, pulsed from his fingertips, and the stinging pain in my wrists began to dull into a numb warmth. "They will heal," he said, his voice a low rumble. He looked up from my hands, his gaze meeting mine. It was the first time we had been truly face to face, without the chaos of the ritual or the distractions of the journey. I saw the raw power in his eyes, but I also saw something else, an ancient weariness, a profound solitude. My courage, born of desperation, finally found a fissure in my fear. My voice was a broken whisper, cracked from disuse and terror. "Why?" He did not pretend to misunderstand. His gaze intensified. Why did I stop them? I could only nod, my throat too tight for more words. He was silent for a long moment, studying my face as if he were trying to read a language he had long forgotten. "The red moon is a night of power," he said slowly, his voice a low timbre that vibrated in my chest. "A night of balance. Debts are paid. Destinies are forged. Your pack of fools thought they could manipulate that power with the blood of an innocent." He released my hands, his expression hardening. "They were wrong. Such power cannot be bargained with. It can only be answered." "Answered?" I whispered. "With what?" "With a balance," he said, his eyes glowing with an inner fire. "They offered weakness. It required strength. They offered an end. It demanded a beginning." He took a step closer, and I had to fight the instinct to retreat. "They offered a sacrifice to a prophecy they barely understand. The prophecy of the wolfless mate." My blood ran cold. I had heard whispers of the prophecy, a mad old seer's tale dismissed by the elders as nonsense. A story about an alpha king of unparalleled power who would find his mate not in the strongest of she-wolves, but in one with no wolf at all. A mate who would be his balance, his anchor, and the key to unlocking a power greater than any had ever seen. It was a children's story, a myth. That's not possible," I stammered. "I'm nothing. I am broken." "Broken?" A faint, humorless smile touched his lips. "You survived 20 years in a pack that despised you. You walked to your own death with your head held high. You stood before me, and you did not shatter. You are many things, Serenia Valor. Broken is not one of them." He knew my name. The sound of it on his lips was both a violation and a validation. He looked at me, truly looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I felt seen. He reached out, his hand stopping just inches from my face. I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "They told you that you were wolfless because you were a flaw," he murmured, his voice dropping to a dangerously intimate tone. "They told you that the silence inside you was emptiness." His eyes held mine, a vortex of gold and shadow. "They lied." His voice was a bare whisper, but it struck me with the force of a physical blow. "The silence inside you is not emptiness, Serenia. It is a cage. The word hung between us, heavy and impossible. Cage. Not a void, not a flaw, but a prison. My mind, already reeling from the night's vertigo, refused to grasp it. For 20 years, my wolflessness had been the defining truth of my existence. It was the quiet emptiness inside me where the wild, snarling spirit of a wolf should have resided. It was the reason for the scorn, the pity, the final, brutal decision to place me upon that altar. To be told that truth was a lie, and by this man, this force of nature who had torn my world apart to save me, was more disorienting than the threat of death itself. No, I breathed. The word a fragile puff of disbelief. It was a reflex, a desperate grasp for the miserable certainty I had always known. You're wrong, there is nothing there. I would know. I have felt the absence my entire life. Darius watched me, his golden eyes unblinking, his expression devoid of pity. He didn't argue. He didn't try to convince me. He simply stated his truth as if it were as solid and real as the stone walls around us. You have felt the cage, he corrected, his voice a low, patient rumble. You have grown so accustomed to its bars that you believe them to be the edges of your own soul. He turned away from me then, moving toward a thick bell pull that hung beside the hearth. He gave it a single, decisive tug. The gesture was so mundane, so normal, it felt bizarre in the charged atmosphere of the room. He was a king summoning his servants, while I stood there, my entire identity unraveling. Hope is a cruel thing to offer a condemned woman, Your Majesty, I whispered to his back, my voice trembling with a nascent anger. It was a spark of defiance I hadn't known I possessed. Is this some game? To save me from one death only to torment me with another? He turned back slowly, his gaze pinning me. The firelight carved deep shadows under his cheekbones, making him look less like a man and more like an ancient wolfish deity. I do not play games, he said, and the sheer cold finality in his tone made me believe him. And I did not save you from death. I claimed you from it. There is a difference. The heavy oak door swung open silently. An older she-wolf stood in the doorway, her hair a cascade of silver braided down her back. Her face was severe, etched with lines of authority, but her eyes, a sharp, intelligent gray, were wide with a carefully controlled curiosity as she looked from her king to me. She bowed low, her posture a testament to years of service and respect. Elara, Darius said, his voice shifting from the low, intense tone he used with me to one of quiet command. This is Serenia. She will be staying in these chambers. She is to be attended to. See that she has a bath, clothes, food, whatever she requires. Elara's gaze flickered over me, taking in the torn sacrificial tunic, my bare, dirty feet, the wild terror that I knew must be plain on my face. Her expression remained impassive, but I could feel her mind racing, could practically smell the questions burning in the air between us. The king had brought a wolfless stray into his personal chambers, into the very heart of the keep. The implications were scandalous, unthinkable. Of course, Your Majesty, she said, her voice crisp and professional. She dipped her head again. It will be done. She looked at me, a flicker of something pity, assessment. In her gray eyes before her face became a mask of efficiency once more. She turned and left, as silently as she had come. Darius's attention returned to me. You are safe here, he stated. It was not a reassurance. It was a fact, a declaration of his protection, which felt as heavy and binding as his fur cloak. No one in this keep will harm you. They would not dare. He moved toward the door. I felt a sudden sharp pang of panic. To be left alone even for a moment in this strange, opulent cage felt more terrifying than standing beside the predator who had put me in it. Where are you going? The question slipped out, small and needy. His hand rested on the iron handle of the door. He paused, looking back at me over his shoulder. I have matters to attend to. A shattered treaty with the Blackwood Crest Pack, for one. A grim, humorless smile touched his lips. Your former elder has much to answer for." He opened the door and stepped into the hallway, then turned to face me one last time. "Eat, rest. We will speak again when the sun rises." And then he was gone, pulling the door shut behind him with a solid final thud. The silence that rushed in to fill the space he left behind was immense, a hollow echo of his power. I was alone. I stood frozen for a long moment, the warmth of the fire on my back, the king's scent still clinging to the air, his impossible words echoing in my head. A cage. Not emptiness. A cage. I wrapped my arms around myself, pressing my palms against my stomach as if I could feel the bars of this supposed prison. But there was nothing, only the familiar, hollow quiet, the terrible, aching silence where a wolf's howl should have been. Soon, Alara returned, followed by 2 younger maids carrying a large copper tub and buckets of steaming water. They moved with a quiet, practiced efficiency, their eyes carefully averted from me. They filled the tub near the fire, the steam rising in fragrant clouds that smelled of lavender and chamomile. They laid out thick, soft towels and a simple but finely woven woolen shift, the color of cream. Alara approached me, her expression unreadable. "The bath is ready," she said, her voice neutral. "We can assist you if you wish." "No," I said quickly, shaking my head. The thought of their hands on me, of their pitying or curious gazes, was unbearable. "Thank you, I can manage." She nodded once, a curt dip of her head. "There is food and wine on the table. When you are finished, leave the tunic outside the door. We will dispose of it." Dispose of it. As if it were a diseased thing, and perhaps it was. They left, and once again, I was alone. I shed the king's heavy cloak, letting it fall in a pool of dark fur on the floor. Then I peeled off the thin, hated tunic, the cloth stiff with my own terrified sweat and the grime of the clearing. I let it drop and kicked it away. Stripped bare, I looked down at my own body, at the gooseflesh on my skin, the faint bruises on my knees from the altar, the raw marks on my wrists. I was a map of my own humiliation. Sinking into the hot, fragrant water of the tub was a shock, a pleasure so acute it was almost painful. The heat soaked into my chilled bones, easing the deep, trembling shiver that I hadn't been able to stop since I'd left the clearing. I scrubbed my skin raw, trying to wash away the scent of the ceremonial smoke, the feel of the leather bindings, the memory of 100 pairs of eyes watching me, waiting for me to die. But most of all, I was trying to wash away the feeling of Darius's hand on mine, the searing heat of his body against my back. As the water cooled, I leaned my head back against the rim of the tub, closing my eyes. A cage. Was it possible? Could there be a part of me, a wild and essential part, that had been locked away so deeply I didn't even know it was there? For a fleeting, dizzying moment, I allowed myself to hope. I reached inside, not with my hands, but with my mind, my will. I searched the familiar silence, listening for a rustle, a growl, a single stirring breath, but there was nothing, only the same profound, echoing stillness I had known. My entire life. The hope shattered, leaving behind the sharp, bitter sting of disappointment. He was wrong, or he was lying. Perhaps he was mad, a king so powerful and so alone that he had started seeing prophecies in the eyes of wolfless strays. Or worse, perhaps he was cruel, building me up with an impossible fantasy. Before he revealed his true purpose for me, the thought sent a fresh wave of cold through me that had nothing to do with the cooling water. I climbed out of the tub, dried myself with the impossibly soft towels, and pulled on the clean shift. The wool was warm and gentle against my skin. I went to the table where a platter of food had been left: roasted chicken, crusty bread, sharp cheese, and a goblet of deep red wine. I was starving, but my stomach clenched at the sight of it. I forced myself to eat a piece of bread, to drink some of an unfamiliar, spiced water instead of the wine. I needed my wits about me. I wandered the room, a ghost in borrowed clothes. I ran my fingers over the leather spines of the books, the cold, smooth surface of the strange skull. This was his space. It was a reflection of him, stark, powerful, ancient, and utterly solitary. There was no touch of a mate here, no sign of a family, just the collected relics of a long, brutal life. Who was this man who had claimed me? This alpha king who saw a cage where everyone else saw a void? Sleep was a distant country I had no hope of reaching. I eventually laid down on the massive bed, sinking into a mountain of furs that smelled faintly of him. I curled into a tight ball, listening to the crackle of the fire and the distant muted sounds of a castle settling into the deepest hours of the night. Sleep did not come. Instead, my mind replayed the moment he had shattered the altar, the rumble of his voice, the impossible feeling of his arm around me, and his last words, "A cage." They lied. Just as the first pale gray light of dawn began to creep through the arrow-slit window high in the wall, the door opened again. It was him. He was dressed in fresh leathers, his black hair damp as if from a morning wash. He carried no weapons, but he was more dangerous than any armed man I had ever seen. He stopped a few feet from the bed, his golden eyes scanning me. He noted that I was awake, that I had barely touched the food. He missed nothing. "The sun rises," he said, his voice quiet in the stillness of the room. "Come." He didn't wait for my reply, simply turned and walked out. I scrambled from the bed, my heart hammering. I had no choice but to follow. He led me not back down into the main keep, but up another narrower set of stairs that spiraled high into one of the keep's towers. The air grew colder as we climbed, and the wind whistled through the stonework. We emerged onto the flat, open roof of the tower. We were above the rest of the keep, the wind whipping my hair and the thin fabric of my shift around me. The sky was a canvas of bruised purple and soft gray, the bloody moon having long since vanished. The world spread out below us, the dark, sleeping rooftops of the castle, the vast, snow-dusted expanse of the forest, the distant, jagged peaks of the mountains. "They told you the moon gives us our power," Darius said, his back to me as he stared out at the horizon. Another lie. He turned to face me, his expression unreadable. "The moon is a mirror. It only reflects the power that is already inside us. For most, it coaxes the wolf to the surface. For you—" He trailed off, taking a step closer. The wind tore at him, but he stood as immovable as the stone beneath his feet. "What is inside me?" I whispered, the words nearly stolen by the wind. "Potential," he answered, his voice a low growl that cut through the gale. "A reservoir of power so deep your ancestors feared it. They couldn't control it, so they locked it away. They created a bloodline of cages, passed down from mother to daughter, calling it a curse, a flaw, a wolflessness." He was so close now I could see the flecks of black in his golden irises. "The prophecy does not say the king's mate will be wolfless. It says she will be the unawakened, the one whose wolf has slept for 1,000 years. He reached out not to touch me, but to point at my chest, his finger hovering an inch from my heart. "And every cage," he murmured, his eyes blazing with a terrifying possessive fire, "has a key." His words struck the air with the force of a physical blow. Every cage has a key. I stood on that windswept tower roof, the cold stone leaching warmth from my feet, and felt a dizzying vertigo, as if the world itself had tilted beneath me. The wind whipped the thin shift against my legs and tore at my hair, a physical manifestation of the tempest roaring inside my own head. For my entire life, the silence inside me had been a fact, as concrete as the stone of this keep. He spoke of it as if it were a construct, a door that could be unlocked. How? The word was a bare whisper, nearly lost to the gale. How could I not know? How could generations of my family not know? Darius did not look away. The rising sun was at his back, casting his immense form in silhouette, but the light caught in his eyes, making them burn like twin embers. "Fear is a powerful anesthetic," he said, his voice a low counterpoint to the howling wind. "It is easier to believe you are flawed than to believe you are carrying something so powerful it had to be imprisoned." Easier to accept a curse than to reclaim a legacy. Your ancestors chose the easier path. They taught their children to be content with the cage, to call it home. He took a step closer, and the wind seemed to lessen, his sheer presence a bulwark against the storm. But the prophecy was not forgotten, only misinterpreted. The unawakened, not a curse to be ended with a blood sacrifice, but a promise waiting for a catalyst. And you are the catalyst? I asked, my voice laced with a skepticism that was my only shield. A strange, almost feral light entered his eyes. Our bloodlines have been tied since the first cage was forged. My line was destined to be the key, yours the lock. The magic that bound your ancestors' wolf can only be undone by the one it was designed to recognize. His gaze was so intense it felt as though he were looking straight through my eyes and into the silent, hollow space within me. It recognizes me. Before I could process the staggering weight of his claim, he turned. Enough of prophecies for now. You are cold, and you must eat. He gestured back toward the stairwell, an undisputed command. I followed him back down the spiraling stairs, my mind a chaos of warring thoughts. Hope was a terrifying, seductive poison. A part of me, a small, desperate child who had always prayed for a miracle, wanted to believe him. But the woman who had knelt on that altar, who had lived with the daily, grinding reality of her otherness, screamed that it was a lie, a cruel, elaborate fantasy. We did not return to his chambers. Instead, he led me down into the belly of the keep, toward the sounds and smells of life. We emerged into a great hall, a cavernous space with a ceiling of smoke-blackened beams high above. A massive fire pit roared in the center, its flames leaping toward the heavens. Long wooden trestle tables were filled with the king's guard and household, a boisterous, formidable assembly of shifters. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meat, fresh bread, and spilled ale. The moment we entered, a hush fell over the hall. It started at our entrance and spread like a wave, extinguishing conversations and laughter. Hundreds of pairs of eyes turned to us, to him in reverence and fear, and to me in stark, unadulterated shock. I was no longer the half-naked stray he'd dragged from the woods. I was clean, dressed in the keep's wool, with his cloak from the night before now, settled properly on my shoulders by his own hand. But what they saw, what they scented, was the same, a wolfless anomaly standing at their king's side. I felt the familiar heat of shame creep up my neck. I instinctively tried to shrink back, to hide behind his larger frame, but his hand shot out and rested on the small of my back, a firm, proprietary gesture that both anchored me and pushed me forward. It was a silent, unmistakable declaration to the entire room. She is with me. He led me toward the high table, a raised dais at the far end of the hall, where a massive carved wooden throne sat empty. He did not lead me to a lesser seat at its side. He led me directly to the throne itself, seating me in a chair placed beside it, a chair that was clearly for a consort, a queen. The collective gasp in the hall was audible. Darius remained standing, his hand resting on the back of my chair, his gaze sweeping the room. "My people," he said, his voice effortlessly commanding the vast space. "Last night I corrected an injustice. The old ways of blood sacrifice and fear-mongering have no place under my rule." His eyes found the faces of his most trusted warriors, his betas and gammas. "This is Serenia. She is under my protection. She will be treated with the same respect you would afford me." A tense silence followed his decree. It was an order, and they would obey it. But acceptance was not the same as obedience. I could see the questions in their eyes and the doubt, the suspicion. Then a voice, smooth and cultured, cut through the tension. "A noble sentiment, Your Majesty." A man rose from a prominent seat at one of the lower tables. He was tall and strikingly handsome, with silver blonde hair that fell to his shoulders and eyes the color of a winter sky. He was dressed in fine tailored leathers, and he moved with an aristocrat's easy grace. "But justice must be tempered with wisdom. Our strength has always been in the purity of our bloodlines. Darius's posture did not change, but I felt the energy around him shift, coiling like a serpent. The temperature in the hall seemed to drop several degrees. "Lord Valerius," Darius said, his voice dangerously soft, "you have something to say. Say it plainly." Lord Valerius offered a shallow, deferential bow that did not quite reach his cold eyes. "I only speak for the security of the kingdom, my king. For generations we have understood that a strong alpha needs a strong Luna, a she-wolf of impeccable lineage to produce heirs worthy of the throne, to bring a wolfless into the heart of our power." He let the words hang, his gaze flicking to me with a look of dismissive pity. "It is a risk. It invites weakness. Our enemies will see it as a sign that the great King Kael'thorn has finally been undone by a misplaced heart." The insult was clear, wrapped in the silken ribbon of feigned concern. I felt myself flush, the shame turning to a hot, helpless anger. He was voicing what everyone else was thinking. He was calling me the king's weakness. Darius was perfectly still for a long, terrifying moment. The hall was so quiet, I could hear the fire crackle. Then he moved. He walked down from the dais, his steps slow, deliberate, each one echoing like a drumbeat of doom. He stopped directly in front of Lord Valerius, who, for all his polished confidence, seemed to shrink under the king's shadow. "You speak of strength, Valerius," Darius growled, his voice a low vibration that seemed to shake the very stones. "You who inherited your title and have never faced a true challenge in your life. You prattle on about bloodlines as if they are the only measure of worth." He leaned in, his voice dropping so low only those nearby could hear, but the menace in it radiated through the entire hall. "You see this girl, and you see weakness. That is because you are a fool. You look, but you do not see." He straightened up, his gaze sweeping the room once more. "My choice of mate is not a matter for debate in this hall. It is not a petition to be voted upon by lesser lords, who value their comfort above all else." His eyes locked back on Valerius. "It is my will, and my will is the only law in this kingdom. Do you understand me?" Valerius's handsome face was pale. He swallowed, his mask of composure cracking. "Yes, your majesty," he said, his voice tight. "Good," Darius said, the word a final, brutal nail in the coffin of the conversation. He turned his back on the lord, the ultimate insult, and walked back to the dais. He sat in his throne, a predator settling into his lair, and gestured for the servants to bring food. The meal was a strained affair. The boisterousness did not return to the hall. People ate quietly, stealing glances at me, at their king, at the humiliated Lord Valerius. I felt like a bone of contention thrown into a wolf pack, a source of a conflict that was only just beginning. When the meal was over, Darius stood, and I rose with him. He led me from the great hall, his hand once again on my back, a silent shield against the whispers that erupted the moment we were gone. We walked in silence through the corridors until we were back in the sanctuary of his chambers. He strode to the fireplace, leaning an arm against the mantel, staring into the flames. The confrontation had left a humming tension in the air. "He will be a problem," I said quietly, finding my voice. "Lord Valerius, he will not let this go." "Valerius is a jackal who nips at the heels of lions," Darius said without turning around. "He is a nuisance, not a threat." "He thinks I make you weak," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. That made him turn. He crossed the room and stopped before me, his face grim. "What he thinks is irrelevant. What do you think?" I looked down at my hands. "I think he is right. I am wolfless. I bring you no powerful bloodline, no wolf to stand with yours. I am a liability." He reached out and tilted my chin up, forcing me to meet his gaze. His eyes were not angry. They were blazing with a fierce intensity. "I told you, you are not weak." "You don't know that," I argued, my voice thick with a lifetime of doubt. "You see a prophecy. I see the same broken girl I've always been." His thumb stroked my jaw, a rough, callous touch that sent a tremor through me. "I know what it is to be judged by the scars you carry." His gaze was fixed on mine, but it seemed to turn inward, looking at memories carved into his own soul. His other hand rose, his fingertips lightly tracing the most prominent scar on his face, the one that cut from his temple down his cheek, narrowly missing his eye. "Do you know how I got this?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. I shook my head, unable to speak. I was young, not yet king. My father thought my wolf was too savage, too uncontrollable. He believed the raw power in our bloodline was a curse that needed to be tempered, or broken. His expression was grim, his eyes dark with the memory. He chained me with silver. He tried to perform a ritual to sever me from my wolf, to make me more civilized, more like Valerius, I suppose. A chill went down my spine. Silver was poison to shifters, a burning agony that could drive a wolf mad. My wolf did not break, he continued, his voice barely a whisper. It fought. It tore against the silver until my blood ran black. It shattered the ritual, and in its rage it rose up and... He paused, his jaw tightening. It did what was necessary to survive. This scar is a reminder from my own father that power, true power, is a thing to be feared by lesser men. He dropped his hand from his face and looked at me, his eyes full of a terrible, ancient understanding. They look at the scar and see a flaw, a mark of brutality, a story of patricide and savagery. They see a monster who killed his own king. He leaned closer, his breath warm against my skin. But I see the moment I refused to be caged. I see the price of my freedom. His fingers, which had been tracing his own scar, now came to rest gently on my cheek. His touch was electric, a brand of heat and power. They look at you, Serenia, and they see a flaw. They see a wolfless girl, an empty vessel. His golden eyes bored into mine, filled with a conviction that shook me to my core. I see a power so immense it had to be chained with blood and bone for 1,000 years. I see a legacy waiting to be unleashed. He stroked my cheek, his gaze unwavering. Your silence is not a weakness. It is a scar, and I will teach you how to see the battle it represents. I will show you the strength it took to survive it. As he spoke, a strange, impossible warmth spread through my chest from the point where his hand rested on my skin. It was a flicker, a tiny ember glowing to life in the vast, cold emptiness inside me. It felt unfamiliar. It felt like a heartbeat, faint and deep, that was not entirely my own. I gasped, my eyes widening, the warmth intensified, a soft pulse of golden light beneath my skin, visible for only a second, right where his fingers lay. Darius saw it. His own eyes widened in shock, the raw power in them surging. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound of primal possessiveness and triumphant awe. He leaned down, his lips just a breath from mine. It begins, he whispered. The world narrowed to the space between our lips. The warmth in my chest, a fragile, nascent sun, pulsed in time with my hammering heart. His words, it begins, were not a promise, but a pronouncement. A shifting of fate made audible. I could feel the heat of his breath, smell the intoxicating scent of winter frost, an ancient power that clung to him like a second skin. Every instinct I possessed, every shred of self-preservation screamed at me to pull away from this man who was both my savior and my captor, this king who was rewriting the very truth of my existence. But I was frozen, mesmerized by the conviction in his burning golden eyes. He didn't kiss me. He pulled back, just an inch, his gaze dropping to the spot on my cheek, where the faint light had pulsed. The triumphant, possessive fire in his eyes was tempered by something else, something I couldn't name. Awe, a profound, reverent wonder that seemed at odds with the brutal king the world knew. He lifted his hand from my skin, and the warmth receded, leaving behind a tingling echo. A ghost of sensation that made the emptiness inside me feel suddenly sharper, more defined. The connection is already there, he murmured, more to himself than to me. Faint, dormant, but alive. He stepped back, putting a deliberate distance between us. The air rushed back into my lungs. He turned and began to pace before the hearth, a caged predator in his own domain. He was radiating an energy that was palpable, a thrumming power that made the very air in the room feel dense and charged. "What was that?" I asked, my hand instinctively going to my cheek, where his touch had lingered. "The light, the feeling. It is the bond," he said without stopping his restless movement. "The magic that ties our bloodlines. My presence is the key, and it has just been inserted into the lock. It is beginning to turn." He stopped and faced me, his expression intense. "The process of awakening will not be easy, Serenia. For 1,000 years this power has slept. Waking it will be like rousing a starving beast. It will be violent. It will be painful, and it will change you." Fear, cold and familiar, coiled in my gut. Change was a terrifying concept. My miserable existence was at least a known quantity. The path he was describing was a leap into an unknown abyss. "Change me how?" "It will break the cage," he said, his voice dropping low. "And what is inside will be set free. Your senses will sharpen. You will feel the world in ways you never have before. You will feel the bond to me, to my wolf, like a living thing inside you. And eventually, you will feel her, your wolf." He said the words with such certainty, such unwavering belief, that it chipped away another piece of my doubt. I wanted to believe him. The desperate, foolish hope he had ignited was a painful, beautiful thing. "What do I have to do?" I asked, the question feeling momentous, as if I were stepping off a cliff's edge. "For now, you do nothing but stay by my side," he commanded. "The proximity to my power will nurture the awakening. The bond needs to strengthen before we can attempt anything more direct." He walked to a large, iron-bound chest in the corner of the room and lifted the heavy lid. He rummaged inside for a moment before pulling out a long, thin object wrapped in oilskin. He brought it to the table and carefully unwrapped it. It was a dagger, but unlike any I had ever seen. The blade was forged of a pale, milky metal that seemed to absorb the firelight rather than reflect it. The hilt was carved from a single piece of what looked like petrified wood, and the pommel was a raw, uncut piece of amber with a speck of something dark trapped within its heart. "What is it?" I breathed, drawn to the strange ancient beauty of the weapon. "Moonstone," he said, his fingers tracing the flat of the blade. "Forged in a way the smiths have long since forgotten. It doesn't cut flesh in the way of steel or iron. It cuts the threads of magic." He looked up at me, his eyes dark. "This blade was used to help forge the first cage, to sever the connection between your ancestor and her wolf. When the time comes, it will be used to cut the final bindings." He was speaking of it as an inevitability, a future already written. He wrapped the dagger back in its oilskin and placed it on the mantelpiece, a silent promise of what was to come. The days that followed were a disorienting blend of tense routine and subtle, unsettling changes. I did as he commanded. I stayed by his side. I sat beside his throne in the great hall during meals, a silent, wolfless specter at the heart of his court. I endured the resentful stares of Lord Valerius and his faction, the cautious curiosity of the other pack members, and the deferential but distant service of Alara and the household staff. I was a foreign object in their world, a puzzle they could not solve, and my only shield was the king's silent, unyielding presence beside me. He was a relentless ruler. I watched him preside over border disputes, pass judgment on thieves, and plan strategies with his war council. His command was absolute, his logic sharp and brutal. He missed nothing, and he tolerated no weakness. Yet with me there was a strange, guarded gentleness. He never pushed me to speak when I was silent. He made sure I was always served food first, that my chambers were always warm. They were small, almost imperceptible gestures, but in a man forged of iron and fury, they stood out like wildflowers in a battlefield. And I began to change. It started with scent. One morning, I woke to the overwhelming aroma of roasting meat from the kitchens, a scent so powerful and complex I could distinguish the smell of the pork from the herbs it was seasoned with. I could smell the sharp metallic tang of the blacksmith's forge from across the courtyard. And most potently, I could always smell him. Even when he was not in the room, his scent, ozone, pine, and scorched earth, lingered, a constant ghostly presence. Then came Zand. The whispers in the great hall were no longer a vague murmur. I could pick out individual words, hear the sibilant hiss of Valerius's name spoken in a corner 100 feet away. I could hear the frantic beat of a mouse's heart in the walls, the soft tread of a guard on the ramparts outside my window. The world, once muffled, was becoming a symphony of terrifyingly clear details. These new senses were overwhelming, a constant assault. I grew tense, jumpy. A dropped platter in the kitchens would make me flinch, as if a thunderclap had gone off beside my ear. The combined sense of the shifters in the great hall were a nauseating tidal wave that often left me dizzy and without appetite. Darius watched it all, his golden eyes missing nothing. One evening, as I sat rigidly at the high table, my hands clenched in my lap, as I tried to block out the cacophony of sound and smell, he leaned toward me. "Do not fight it," he murmured, his voice a low vibration that cut through the noise. "Let it flow through you. Focus on one thing, one sound, one scent." "I can't," I whispered back, my head pounding. "Focus on me," he commanded softly. "Find my scent. Listen for my heartbeat. Let it be your anchor in the storm." Hesitantly, I closed my eyes. I sifted through the overwhelming sensory data, the smell of ale, sweat, wood smoke, roasting meat, and beneath it all, the steady, grounding scent of him, ozone and pine. I focused on it, held on to it like a drowning woman clinging to a rope. Then I listened, past the clatter of plates and the roar of voices, for the slow, powerful, steady rhythm of his heart. Thump, 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 thump. The chaos began to recede. The other sounds and smells faded to a manageable background hum. The world simplified, anchored by his presence. When I opened my eyes, he was watching me, a look of grim approval on his face. The strangest changes, however, happened when he was close. When his hand brushed mine, the warmth that had bloomed in my chest would flicker to life again. Sometimes, in the quiet of his chambers, I would feel a sudden, sharp emotion that was not my own, a flash of anger as he read a report, a wave of weariness as he stared into the fire. It was his. I was feeling his emotions, faint echoes across the burgeoning bond between us. It was both terrifying and intoxicatingly intimate. One night, I was woken from a restless sleep by a nightmare. I was back in the clearing, the red moon bleeding overhead. Elder Maeve stood over me with the obsidian knife, but this time, when she struck, it was not my chest she pierced. It was my mind. The blade plunged into the silence within me, and the silence screamed. It was a soundless, soul-shattering shriek of a thing that had been caged for 1,000 years. I sat bolt upright in the massive bed, gasping for air, my body slick with a cold sweat. The dream had been so real, so visceral, that the silent scream was still echoing in my skull. The door to my bedchamber, an adjoining room to his main one, flew open. Darius stood there, silhouetted in the doorway, wearing only a pair of dark breeches. The moonlight from the window limned the hard, corded muscles of his chest and shoulders, the landscape of scars that marred his skin. His eyes were wide, blazing with a wolf's feral light. "What is it?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. "What happened?" He had clearly been sleeping, but now he was coiled like a wolf ready to spring, scanning the room for a threat. "A dream," I stammered, my heart still pounding. "It was just a nightmare." He crossed the room in 3 strides, his presence filling the space. He stopped by the bed, his concern so potent I could feel it washing over me. "You cried out." "No, I didn't," I whispered. "I never make a sound." It was true. Even in my worst moments, my fear had always been a silent thing. His expression was grim. "I heard you, Serenia, not with my ears." He tapped his temple with his forefinger. Here, through the bond, it was like a blade in my mind. He had felt my silent scream. The thought was staggering. He had heard the agony of the caged thing inside me. He sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping under his weight. The proximity of his bare skin, the sheer heat and power radiating from him, made my breath catch in my throat. He reached out, his hand hovering over my shoulder, hesitating for a fraction of a second before he laid it gently on me. His touch was a brand, a claim, a comfort. The frantic pounding of my heart began to slow, soothed by his presence. "The awakening is accelerating," he said, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room. "The cage is weakening. The closer we get to the next full moon, the more it will fight." We sat in silence for a long moment. His hand a warm, heavy weight on my shoulder. I could feel the weariness in him, the constant crushing weight of his kingship. And through the bond, I felt a flicker of something else, a deep, aching loneliness that was so profound it stole my breath. This man, surrounded by subjects and warriors, was utterly alone. Without thinking, I lifted my own hand and placed it over his. It was a small gesture, hesitant and shy, but the effect was immediate. A jolt like lightning passed between us. His head snapped up, his golden eyes locking with mine. The loneliness I had sensed was replaced by a surge of raw, possessive hunger that was so powerful it made me dizzy. His pupils dilated, the gold consumed by the blackness of the wolf. A low growl escaped his throat, a sound that was pure primal instinct. He leaned in, his other hand coming up to cup my face, his thumb stroking my lower lip. "You feel it now, don't you?" he rasped, his voice thick with a desire that was as ancient as the moon. The pull, the truth that was written in our blood before we were ever born. My name was a breath on his lips. Serenia. He was going to kiss me. I knew it. And for the first time, I didn't want to run. I leaned into his touch, my eyes fluttering shut, waiting. And then a horn blew. A single urgent, piercing blast from the watchtower that sliced through the night. A signal of alarm. An intruder. Darius stiffened, pulling back instantly. The predator was gone, replaced by the king. He was on his feet in a second, the moment of intimacy shattered. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice once again hard as iron. "Bar the door." He was gone before I could even reply. A whirlwind of furious power vanishing into the hallway. I was left trembling in the massive bed, my lips tingling from a kiss that had never happened, the ghost of his touch on my skin. And outside, in the cold, dark night, a new danger had arrived. The slam of the door as Darius left was a physical blow, leaving a vacuum in the room that was instantly filled with the shriek of the alarm horn and the distant, panicked shouts of guards. My heart, which had been slowing under the calm weight of his touch, rabbit-punched my ribs. I scrambled from the bed, my bare feet cold on the stone floor, and obeyed his command. I shot the heavy iron bolt across the door and leaned against the wood, my body trembling with a violent cocktail of unfulfilled desire and stark terror. Outside, the keep had erupted. The sounds, amplified by my newly sharpened senses, were a chaotic symphony of violence. I could hear the clang of steel on steel from the courtyard, the guttural roars of shifting wolves, the sharp authoritative commands of Darius's betas. Through the floorboards, I could feel the vibrations of dozens of heavy running feet. The entire fortress had transformed from a sleeping giant into a roused beast. I was utterly alone, a prisoner in my safe room, while a war raged just outside my door. My mind reeled, trying to catch up. The nightmare, the bond, the near kiss that had promised to shatter the world, and now this. I pressed my palms against my eyes, trying to block out the sensory overload. But I couldn't block out the bond. It was a thin, thrumming thread connecting me to Darius, and right now, it was vibrating with his fury. I could feel his rage, a cold, controlled inferno, a terrifying contrast to the hot, possessive hunger I had felt from him moments before. It was the focused rage of a king whose territory had been violated, whose authority had been challenged. Beneath the rage, I could feel the sharp, clear edge of his focus, the tactical mind of a warrior assessing threats. and tangled within it all was another, fiercer emotion, one that was directed protectively, possessively back at me. He was fighting not just for his keep, but for the unawakened mate he had claimed from a sacrificial altar. The realization sent a fresh wave of tremors through me. I backed away from the door, wrapping his heavy fur cloak, which still lay on a nearby chair, around my shoulders. Burying my face in it, I inhaled his scent. It was my only anchor. I began to pace the confines of the room, a caged thing myself, listening to the battle unfold. The sounds of fighting were moving, no longer contained to the courtyard. They were now inside the keep, echoing in the stone corridors. Closer. My heightened hearing became a curse. I could distinguish the individual grunts of pain, the wet, sickening sound of claws finding purchase in flesh. The metallic scent of blood, faint at first, began to snake under the door, a venomous perfume that made my stomach clench. They were getting closer to the king's chambers, closer to me. This wasn't a random attack. It was targeted. They had come for something or someone. A heavy thud slammed against my door, making me cry out and stumble backward. Shouts erupted just outside, in the corridor leading to our chambers. I heard the voice of the guard Darius had posted, a man named Fendrel, roaring a challenge. It was answered by a snarled command in a voice I didn't recognize, followed by the sickening crunch of bone. Fendrel let out a choked cry, then silence. My blood ran cold. I was defenseless, a wolfless girl in a thin shift, armed with nothing but a king's cloak. I scanned the room wildly, my eyes landing on the mantelpiece. The moonstone dagger. It lay there, wrapped in its oilskin, a sleeping threat. Could I even wield it? Before I could move, another body slammed against the door, and I heard the iron bolt groan in protest. Someone was trying to break in. Panic seized me, raw and absolute, and then a new sound cut through the chaos. A growl. It was not the sound of an ordinary wolf. This was a sound that shook the stones of the keep, a primordial roar of utter, absolute authority that ripped through the air and silenced every other noise. It was the Alpha King. I felt his arrival through the bond a split second before I heard him. His rage intensified, becoming a white-hot nova of pure, lethal intent. I scrambled to the door, pressing my ear against the cold wood. "You dare!" Darius's voice was a low, terrifying whisper that carried more menace than any shout. "You dare bring your filth to this threshold." A woman's voice, raspy and filled with a venomous hatred that I knew all too well, answered him. "We came for the abomination, to finish what should have been done under the red moon, Elder Maeve." My heart stopped. My pack. They had followed me. They had infiltrated the most secure fortress in the lands to finish their ritual. The sheer, insane audacity of it was matched only by the depth of their fanaticism. I heard a brief, violent scuffle, the meaty thud of fists on flesh, and a choked gasp of pain. "Your pack is broken," Darius snarled. "Your alpha is on his knees in my dungeons. Did you truly believe your pathetic band of zealots could succeed where he failed?" "He was weak," Maeve shrieked, her voice cracking with fury. "He feared you, I do not. The prophecy must be fulfilled. Her blood must be spilled to prevent the coming ruin. It is the only way." "The only ruin I see here," Darius's voice was now dangerously soft, "is your own." I couldn't stand it any longer. I crept to the door and eased the bolt back, just a fraction, opening a tiny crack to see into the corridor. The scene was a tableau of carnage. Two of my former pack members, their faces twisted in death, lay on the stone floor in pools of their own blood. The guard, Fendrel, was slumped against the wall, alive but badly wounded. And standing over the kneeling captive form of Elder Maeve was Darius. He was no longer the conflicted, solitary king from moments before. He was a force of nature. His eyes were not golden, they were molten, blazing with the full, untamed power of the Alpha King. His canines were slightly elongated, his hands curled into claws, the predator just barely contained within the skin of the man. He held Maeve by her throat, his grip effortless, lifting her partially from the floor. Maeve, her face purple from the lack of air, glared at him with pure, unadulterated loathing. Her eyes flicked toward the crack in the door and found mine. A triumphant, hateful smile twisted her lips. "There she is," she rasped, her voice a strangled croak. "The vessel of the destroyer, the curse with a beating heart. Do you think you are saving her, King Kelthorn? You are merely sharpening the blade that will gut this world." Darius's growl deepened, the sound vibrating through the floor and up my bones. He seemed to pay her words no mind, his focus entirely on the threat she represented. "You speak of prophecies you cannot read," he bit out, his grip tightening. "And you are a fool blinded by a pretty face and a broken thing to pity," Maeve choked out, clawing uselessly at his hand. "The prophecy of the unawakened. It is a warning, not a promise. Her wolf was not caged to protect her. It was caged to protect us from it. When it wakes, it will not be a wolf you see, but a hunger that will consume the moon itself. My bloodline was sworn to be its jailer, and if necessary, its executioner." Her words were a physical blow. A hunger that will consume the moon, a jailer, an executioner. She was twisting everything he had told me, turning the promise of an awakening into a doomsday clock. "Lies of a desperate woman," Darius snarled, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not doubt, but a sudden, sharp wariness. She knew things that resonated with a deeper, older truth. He looked past her, his burning gaze finding mine through the crack in the door. The raw fury in his eyes softened for a barest fraction of a second, replaced by that fierce, possessive concern. He saw the terror on my face, the confusion sown by Maeve's words. His jaw tightened. He turned his attention back to Maeve. With a flick of his wrist, he slammed her against the opposite wall. Her head connected with the stone with a sickening crack, and she slumped to the ground, unconscious but still breathing. He didn't kill her. He had questions for her. He immediately turned and strode to my door, pushing it fully open. He filled the doorway, his massive form blocking out the carnage in the hall. His eyes, still glowing with a residual feral light, swept over me, checking for any injury. His chest was rising and falling heavily, and a splatter of blood that was not his own marred his cheek. "Are you harmed?" he demanded, his voice a low, rough growl. I could only shake my head, my throat too tight to speak. He stepped inside, closing the door on the scene in the hall, shutting out the world and enclosing us in a sudden, intense intimacy. The scent of him, now mingled with the copper tang of battle, was overwhelming. He reached out, not touching me, but his hand hovered near my arm as if to assure himself I was real, that I was safe. "She lied," he said, his voice firm. A command for me to believe him. "She is a fanatic who would see you dead to preserve her own twisted beliefs." But Maeve's words had been splinters of ice in my soul. A jailer, an executioner, a hunger that will consume the moon. The fear I felt was no longer just of the unknown, but of myself, of what I might become. What if he was wrong? What if the thing inside me wasn't a noble wolf, but a monster? "She knew about the cage," I whispered, my voice trembling. "She called her bloodline its jailer," a muscle feathered in Darius's jaw. "She knows a corrupted version of the truth, passed down through generations of fear." He took a step closer, his intensity a physical force. "Do not let her poison you. Look at me, Serenia." I lifted my gaze to his. The feral light was fading from his eyes, replaced by the weary, ancient gold I was coming to know. He saw the doubt in my eyes, the terror. "I will not let her, or anyone else, harm you," he vowed, his voice a raw whisper. He lifted his hand and gently, with the back of his knuckles, brushed the blood from his cheek. Then he reached for me, his blood-stained hand cupping my face. His thumb stroked my cheekbone, right over the spot where the light had pulsed before. "This bond," he murmured, his gaze holding mine captive. "It does not lie. It is a connection of mates, of equals, not of a king and a monster." His touch, his conviction, was a powerful balm to my frayed nerves. I leaned into his hand, closing my eyes, seeking his strength. The ember of warmth in my chest flickered, stronger this time, pushing back against the chilling tendrils of Maeve's words. But the doubt remained, a seed of ice planted deep within me. He called it an awakening. She called it an apocalypse. He lowered his head, his forehead coming to rest against mine. We stood there for a long moment, breathing the same air, the chaos of the keep outside a distant echo. The battle was over, but I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that the real war, the one for the soul of the wolf within the sacrifice, had only just begun. His forehead against mine was a brand of possession and a bastion against the storm. In the aftermath of the attack, the keep was a hive of frantic, controlled activity, but in this room, with the door shut and Darius's presence enveloping me, there was only a fragile, humming silence. The scent of his righteous fury was still on the air, mingling with the smell of spilled blood from the hallway, but the immediate threat was over. Maeve's chilling words, however, still echoed in my mind, a venomous counter-melody to the steady, reassuring beat of his heart that I could feel through the bond. He pulled back, his hands framing my face. The last of the feral light had receded from his eyes, leaving them the color of ancient gold, filled with a grim, weary resolve. He had protected his keep, but the assault on my spirit was a different kind of battle, one he couldn't fight with claws and fury. "She is in the dungeons," he stated, his voice a low rumble. "She will be interrogated. I will have the truth of what she knows, all of it." He saw the fear still lingering in my eyes. Her words were meant to break you, to make you fear the very thing that will make you whole. Do not give her that victory. I wanted to believe him, to cling to the fierce certainty in his gaze, but Maeve's words felt like a different kind of prophecy, a darker thread in the tapestry of my fate. It was caged to protect us. From what? What kind of wolf needed a cage forged from a bloodline of jailers? Before I could voice my fears, he turned, every inch the king taking command once more. "The keep is secure, but you are not safe here alone." His gaze swept the room, then landed on me, a decision hardening his features. "You will stay with me, in my chambers, where I can feel any threat to you instantly." It was not a suggestion, it was a decree. The thought of sleeping in his room, in his bed, sent a jolt of equal parts terror and a forbidden, thrilling warmth through me. It was a move of pure pragmatism, a king protecting a vital asset. But the look in his eyes held more than that. It held the possessive primal instinct of a wolf guarding his mate. Ilara and 2 guards were summoned. They removed the bodies from the hallway with grim efficiency, mopped the blood from the stones, and tended to the wounded Fendrel, who would live. Through it all, Darius never left my side. He moved my few belongings, the woolen shift, a comb, the cloak, from my room into his own, placing them on a chest at the foot of his massive fur-piled bed, as if they belonged there. The act was so domestic, so definitive, it made my breath catch. He was weaving my life into his. Thread by thread, the rest of the night passed in a blur. Darius was called away to his war council to deal with the fallout of the attack, the breach in security, the interrogation of the handful of surviving zealots, and the fate of the disgraced Blackwood Crest Pack. He left me in his chambers with 2 of his most elite guards stationed outside the door. I did not sleep. I sat by the fire, wrapped in his cloak, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the keep returning to a tense, watchful quiet. When he finally returned, hours later, the gray light of a bleak dawn was filtering through the window. He looked exhausted, the lines around his eyes deeper, the weight of his crown a visible burden. He shed his leather tunic, revealing the scarred, powerful landscape of his torso, and washed his face and hands in a basin of water. He moved with a weary grace, the alpha at rest but never truly off guard. He came and stood before the fire, looking down at me. "Maeve is resilient," he said, his voice rough with fatigue. "She holds her secrets close. But she gave me one thing." I looked up, my heart tensing. What? The cages were not just meant to bind, he said slowly, his gaze intense. They were designed to weaken. With every generation, the wolf inside was meant to grow fainter, to starve in the silence, until it faded into nothing. The ritual on the red moon, the spilling of your blood, was not an appeasement to the goddess. It was the final turn of the key. The act that would have extinguished the wolf inside you forever. I stared at him, my mind reeling. My death was meant to be the final murder of my own wolf. My pack, in their ignorance and fear, had been trying to complete the work of my ancestors. So they were jailers. They were, he confirmed, his expression grim. But they have failed. Your wolf is not fading, Serenia. Since you have been here, bound to me, it has begun to stir. It is fighting. Maeve and her fanatics sensed that. They knew their time to destroy it was running out. That is why they came. He had reframed her words, turning her story of a monster into a story of survival. A wolf so powerful it had refused to starve, refused to die, surviving for 1,000 years in a silent prison. My wolf. The thought was a terrifying, brilliant sun rising within me. He held out a hand to me. Come. You need to rest. I hesitated for only a second before placing my hand in his. His grip was warm and firm, his calloused skin a comforting reality against my own. He led me to the bed. The bed. It was enormous, a sea of dark furs and soft hides that could easily hold 4 people. But the intimacy of sharing it, of lying beside him, was a chasm I wasn't sure I could cross. Sensing my hesitation, he simply pulled back the furs on one side. Sleep, he commanded gently. No one will harm you here. He did not get in beside me. Instead, he took his place in a large, throne-like chair near the fire, settling in to watch over me as I slept. He was my protector, my guard, my king. The gesture was so profoundly honorable, so at odds with the brutal legends that surrounded him, that it fractured something deep inside me. I slipped into the bed, the furs cool against my skin at first, then rapidly warming with my body heat. They smelled of him, a clean, primal scent of winter and power. Exhaustion, both physical and emotional, finally claimed me. As I drifted off, I could feel his watchful presence through the bond, a steady, unwavering shield. For the first time in my life, I felt completely, utterly safe. And in the depths of that safe, dreamless sleep, something shifted. I woke to darkness, not the darkness of the room, but a deeper, more profound blackness. I was not in the bed. I was somewhere else, a void. And I was not alone. There was a presence with me, vast and ancient and filled with a pain so deep it was a physical force. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. It was a coiled spring of immense power, held in check by 1,000 invisible threads. It was the caged thing. My wolf. Who are you? The question was not in words, but in a wave of pure, inquisitive energy directed at me. I flinched from the intensity of it. I am Serenia. My own thought felt small, fragile in this immense silent space. A wave of something akin to bitter, ancient laughter washed over me. The name of the cage. I do not ask the name of my prison. I ask who is the soul within it. I had no answer. Who was I without the identity of the wolfless girl, without the shame, the fear, the silence? You are afraid, the presence noted. It was not an accusation, simply a statement of fact. The jailers have taught you to fear me. They tell you I am a hunger, a destroyer. Are you? The question was a trembling whisper in the void. The presence was silent for a long moment. A deep, primal sorrow radiated from it, so potent it brought tears to my eyes. I am hungry, it finally admitted. I have been starved for 1,000 years. I am a rage, for I have been a prisoner. I am a power that has been denied its sky. But I am not a destroyer. A new feeling pulsed from it, a fierce, unwavering loyalty that was staggering in its intensity. And you are not my cage. You are my other half, my heart, my soul. and they have kept us apart. A sudden blinding rage emanated from the wolf, directed not at me, but at the invisible bindings that held it. The void trembled. I felt the threads strain. The key has turned. The wolf's thoughts crashed into mine. The walls are cracking. I can feel him. The alpha, our mate. The feeling that came with that word was a cataclysm of possessive joy, of primal recognition, so powerful it buckled my knees in the dream space. He is calling to us. We must answer. I felt a violent pull, as if my very essence were being dragged forward. The invisible threads that bound the wolf groaned, stretching to their breaking point. I felt a tearing sensation deep within my soul, a pain that was both terrifying and liberating. I woke with a gasp, my body arching off the bed. Pain, sharp and blinding, ripped through me. It was not a physical pain, but deeper, as if my soul were being torn in two. My throat opened, but the scream that came out was not my own. It was a howl, high, wild, and filled with 1,000 years of rage and longing. It was a sound of breaking chains. Darius was at my side in an instant, his hands on my shoulders, holding me down. "Serenia, fight it, it's too soon." But it wasn't me fighting. The power erupting inside me was a tidal wave, an ancient force that had finally broken its dam. My vision blurred, the edges tinged with gold. The sense in the room exploded into 1,000 distinct notes. The sound of Darius's heart was a war drum in my ears. The threads inside me were snapping one by one, and with each break, more of the wolf's raw power flooded my senses. My bones began to ache, to shift. The pain was excruciating, a fire in my marrow. This was the change, the shift, the awakening, and it was going to tear me apart. "Breathe," Darius commanded, his voice a desperate, grounding force in the storm. "Focus on me, don't let it consume you." I tried to focus on his face, but the features were wavering, shifting. The human part of me, the girl who had lived in silence for 20 years, was being overwhelmed, drowned. The wolf, ecstatic and ravenous in its newfound freedom, was taking over. I could feel its savage joy, its desperate need to run, to hunt, to claim its mate. My hands clenched, my nails digging into the furs. My spine arched, my teeth elongating, grinding together in a wave of agony and ecstasy. This was it, the moment of truth. Was I Serenia, or was I the hunger that would consume the moon? Through the golden haze of my vision, I saw the panic in Darius's eyes. He had wanted this, had orchestrated it, but he had not expected it to be so violent, so fast. He had underestimated the power that had been caged for so long. He grabbed my face in his hands, forcing me to look at him. "Serenia," he roared, his own alpha power rising to meet the torrent inside me. "You are the soul, not the cage. You are the mind, not the hunger. You are the wolf's heart. Command it." His words, his sheer force of will, were a lifeline. I clung to them, focusing all of my consciousness on that single point of contact. I am Serenia. I am its heart. The pain crested, and in the center of the storm, I found a point of stillness. I was not the cage. I was not the prisoner. We were two halves of a whole. I reached into the storm, not to fight it, but to embrace it. I wrapped my consciousness around the raging, joyful, hungry spirit of my wolf. And for the first time, I didn't try to silence it. I gave it my name, and it, in turn, gave me its strength. The golden haze in my vision solidified, sharpened. The pain receded, replaced by a feeling of power so immense, so profound, it was like breathing for the first time. I looked at Darius, no longer through the eyes of a frightened human girl, but through the golden eyes of a wolf that had waited 1,000 years to see her mate. He stared back, his breath catching in his throat. He saw the change in my eyes, the integration. He saw not a monster, but a queen who had finally found her throne. I lifted a hand, my own hand, no longer writhing in a forced shift, but steady and sure. I laid it against his cheek. His skin was hot, his pulse a frantic, thrumming beat beneath my palm. "Darius," I said, and my voice was not the whisper of Serenia, the wolfless girl. It was deeper, richer, resonant with an ancient power. It was the voice of a wolf and a woman, finally made one. The cage is broken, his eyes, wide with awe and a dawning triumphant possessiveness, held mine. He leaned in, his lips finally claiming mine. In a kiss that was not gentle or hesitant, but a brutal, desperate collision. It was a claiming, a sealing of a bond a millennium in the making. It was the taste of victory, of destiny, of a crown forged not of gold, but of blood and moonlight. And in that moment, under his lips, with my wolf song finally roaring in my soul, I was no longer the sacrifice. I was the prophecy fulfilled. 3 moons had waxed and waned since the night the cage had shattered. 3 cycles of silver light washing over the snow-dusted peaks and the deep, silent forests of the north. From the tower rooftop where Darius had first told me I was a prison, the world looked the same. The wind still carried the scent of pine and cold stone, and the kingdom below still bustled with the steady, rhythmic life of his people. The world was the same, but I was irrevocably, fundamentally changed. I stood at the stone battlement, the wind a welcome caress against my skin. No longer a biting enemy. It brought me the story of the keep on its currents, the scent of Alara's herb garden beginning to thaw under the tentative spring sun, the distant clang of the blacksmith's hammer shaping steel, the savory aroma of bread baking in the kitchens. I could hear the laughter of pups tumbling in the training yard, and the low murmur of Lord Valerius in the council chambers below, his voice, once a silken threat, now laced with a grudging but genuine respect when he spoke my name. I was no longer an anomaly to be whispered about. I was the Moonstone Luna, the king's mate, a power to be acknowledged. The silence inside me was gone. In its place was a constant, living presence, a warm, golden weight in my soul that was as much a part of me as my own heartbeat. My wolf. She was not the ravenous monster Maeve had prophesied. She was ancient and wise, fierce and protective, a wellspring of quiet power that tempered the raw, brutal force of Darius's own spirit. She did not rage. She watched. She did not hunger. She loved. And her love for our mate was a vast, boundless ocean within me. I felt him before I heard him. A steady, familiar warmth spreading through the bond, a quiet announcement of his approach. I didn't turn when his footsteps sounded on the stone behind me. I didn't need to. He came to stand beside me, his presence a mountain at my back, shielding me from a wind I no longer feared. His arm slid around my waist, pulling me back against the solid wall of his chest. I leaned my head back against his shoulder, my new, heightened senses drinking in the familiar, grounding scent of him. "You are quiet," he murmured, his lips brushing the sensitive skin behind my ear. The casual intimacy of the gesture still sent a shiver of pleasure through me. "I was listening," I answered, my voice calm and sure. "To our home." The word home no longer felt foreign on my tongue. And remembering, his grip on my waist tightened slightly. Remembering what? "The last time we stood here," I said, turning my head to look at him. The scars on his face were no longer marks of a brutal past, but simply part of the man I loved, a map of the battles that had forged him. The ancient weariness was gone from his eyes, replaced by a deep, settled contentment that was reserved only for me. "You told me every cage has a key. I thought you were either a liar or a madman." A low chuckle rumbled in his chest, a sound I had come to cherish. "And now? Now I know you are a king who saw a truth no one else was worthy of seeing." I lifted a hand, my fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "And I know that the cage was not my true prison. The fear was. The shame. You broke them all." We stood in comfortable silence for a long moment, watching the sun begin its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold. His chin rested on the top of my head, his heart beat a steady, powerful rhythm against my back. "Maeve is gone," he said quietly, closing a final door on the past. "I exiled her to the Shattered Isles, a prison of ice and solitude to reflect on her fanaticism. Her aiders were given a choice. Bend the knee to their new Luna in truth, or follow their elder into the cold. He paused. None chose exile. And the Blackwood Crest Pack? I asked, needing to know. They have a new alpha, chosen by me, a young she-wolf with a good heart and a strong will. She is rebuilding what Maeve's fear nearly destroyed. They are paying tribute to the crown, and they have sent gifts. In your name. He turned me in his arms, his golden eyes searching mine. There is no more debt to the Red Moon. You are free of them, Serenia, of all of it. I looked into his face, into the eyes of the Alpha King who had torn apart a ritual to claim a wolfless sacrifice. He had saved me from death, but it was so much more than that. He had given me a life I could never have dreamed of. He had seen a queen where everyone else, including myself, had seen only a broken girl. Not all of it, I whispered, my voice thick with an emotion so powerful it was a physical ache in my chest. I am not free of you. His expression softened, the fierce king giving way completely to the devoted mate. Nor I of you, he breathed. You are the anchor to my soul, the stillness in my rage. Before you, I ruled. Now with you I live. He lowered his head and kissed me. It was not the desperate, claiming kiss of our awakening, but a slow, deep, reverent joining that spoke of shared dawns and quiet nights, of battles fought and won, of a future forged together. It spoke of love, a love as wild and as ancient as the wolves in our souls. When he finally pulled back, the first stars were beginning to prick the darkening velvet of the sky. He kept me close, his arms wrapped around me, our foreheads touching. Through the bond, I felt the full, unshielded force of his love for me, a tide of emotion so vast it brought tears to my eyes, and I let him feel mine in return. My gratitude, my devotion, my love for the scarred, solitary king who had looked at a sacrifice and seen a destiny. The prophecy of the unawakened mate is fulfilled, he murmured against my lips, his voice a low, possessive rumble. It ends here, with us. I smiled, a true, joyous smile that reached the golden eyes of my wolf. I looked out at the vast, starlit kingdom that was now ours, at the endless expanse of the sky above, and I felt the truth of it settle deep in my bones. The prophecy was not an ending. It was a brutal, bloody, beautiful beginning. The prophecy is over, I whispered back, my hand coming to rest over his heart, feeling the steady, unbreakable rhythm beneath my palm. Our reign has just begun.